So we just decided to quit, sell everything. To give you a little history before I get into that. I've worked way too much in my life. Now, I'm not a lazy person. I'm sure somebody's gonna say, oh, of course you're lazy. I'm lazy now, maybe. When I got out of high school, I joined the Navy, got onto a submarine. And on submarines, they don't have 24-hour days. They have 18-hour days. 6 hours on watch, whatever your watch station was, 6 hours of maintenance and cleanup, and then 6 hours of sleep. You work 12 hours, got 6 hours of sleep. Of course, if you didn't have a lot of maintenance or cleanup duties, then you could go in and maybe play some video games. But regardless, I mean, it was a pretty hectic life. Now, the nice thing about my submarine was it was, I don't know, 3 or 4 months on and then 3 or 4 months off because there was 2 crews. I got out of the Navy and I immediately started looking for jobs, and I worked for quality control, quality assurance in a lot of different industries, automotive suppliers. But in 2001, I started my own business. I was pretty dedicated to it. Now, here's the thing, is I married my ex-wife, she was my wife at the time, obviously, and I adopted her daughter. Now, her daughter was just over a year old, so it was called a step-parent adoption. I was pretty dedicated to, in my mind, I was pretty dedicated to her, to my daughter. I wanted the best for her, and as a result, we decided to homeschool. Now, homeschooling was pretty costly. I mean, you buy your own books. Of course, if you were sending your kid to school, you pay taxes, but I still had to pay taxes and homeschool. I'm not complaining. It was the best decision we ever made. But I had to work. Now, at the same time, society tells us that we have to be driven. We have to be career orientated. And so I started my own company. It was a consulting firm. I went to manufacturing companies and I coached them on how to improve their customer satisfaction. Now, there's all kinds of standards and books and things that you had to know to use. There was qualifications, certifications, and there was just all kinds of stuff involved in that. So I'm kind of oversimplifying what I did. So what I would do is I would write documentation for these folks, a binder of documentation that basically were instructions on how to operate to improve your customer satisfaction, to improve your processes. And of course, I'm again oversimplifying. I could talk decades about this subject. Well, once you did that, then you regularly got audited. So the company had to be audited. So I always had to be there for those audits to make sure that we did well. But I also had to make sure that they were ready for audits. So every 3 months, I would go to these organizations and I would check on how they were doing. So it was an audit, it's called an internal audit, and then you got your external audit once a year. Now, I pretty much covered the Midwest, Missouri, Wisconsin. I even went as far as Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, so kind of that area. I can't think of anything else. So in that time frame, I put about 500,000 miles on vehicles. I think I had 3 vehicles that I went through during that time frame, so about 500,000 miles. To kind of give you an idea, so over 10 years, 500,000 miles. So I traveled a lot. Now, we tried to combine trips. So if there was 2 jobs in Minnesota, we always tried to get those 2 jobs. So I'd go up there, work with one company, and then I'd work with the next company. And this is where I got most of my gray hair. Now, I know you don't get gray hair from stress, but bad diet, on the road eating fast food all the time. So you just become unhealthy. I was pretty successful in my business. My business lasts 10 years. But what I guess I didn't realize is how much I neglected my daughter while doing this. My goal was to make sure she had the best education, and she does. I mean, she's got a buku of degrees now. She's going, I think, getting a doctorate or something from Harvard. I made a video about her. She actually let me use one of her videos. I put it on my YouTube channel. I don't know which one it is. I'd have to find it again. She's married now. When she was going to community college, she told Carolyn I was not really there that much, and that I was pretty much just the money guy. I've reflected on that a lot, and it's really hurtful that I did that. It was not my intention. Didn't even pay attention to what I was doing. I just know that I wanted to get her the best education. That took focus, and I guess my focus neglected my time with her. And I hate that. I can't get that time back. It's over with. Moving forward, now she's on her own, she's married. I decided to get a regular job. I closed down my company and I went and got a regular job. Now this job was one of my clients, actually. I actually worked for 2 of them, I guess. Worked for one for a while and worked for another, but they were sheltered workshops. And what they do is they hire disabled folks, developmentally disabled, and we try to teach them how to work in a manufacturing environment with the ultimate goal of getting them into a regular organization outside of the workshop. Now, some of them will never accomplish that. Now, some did, and boy, I tell you, that was a huge success story. I remember one guy, Zach. He was very immature. You would think of him, I mean, he was probably, I don't know, 25, 26 years old, but he probably acted like a 13 or 14-year-old. But we got him where he could focus on his job, and he got a real job. You know, he was able to quit the workshop and go work for an actual manufacturer. And I remember he called me one time. He says, "Hey, Rob, I got a job, and I got insurance," and he just went on about all the stuff that he had. And I thought it was fascinating. He was able to get off Social Security. What was even better was he was able to get another job, which paid better, and he got a nicer car. I know another guy who worked there. His name was Jeremiah. I suppose he's still there. Had I stayed, he would probably have moved on to a manufacturer. I'm not sure where he's at right now. But I was able to get him to become what's called a line leader. So he was actually running the line with workers. So he was in a supervisory role, for lack of a better word. Of course, he had supervisors who made sure he was doing everything correctly. He got married, had 2 kids, has a beautiful house. His wife works. It's just great. I mean, it was a very rewarding job. But imagine this. You work in a company that have people who have disabilities. I mean, that's just what it is. But you have to get them to produce to be competitive with other manufacturers. So if we produce a widget, whatever that widget is, if there's another company producing a widget, we had to be able to produce at the same production level. So that was very stressful. And it took a lot of focus. It required me to work tons of hours. Now, Dad will always say, when I talk to him about this, it's not the hours you were worried about, which it wasn't. It wasn't the hours. It was the stress. It was the constant push. It was the constant we're in trouble. I mean, if we had a quality defect, think about that. Our quality level had to be superior than other manufacturers. A lot of companies don't want to buy from a company that was produced by disabled people. It's just the reality, and it's very sad, but that's just the way it was. They were not overly excited about having disabled people producing products for them. So your quality level always had to be spot on. And when you messed up, it was quite likely you would lose that customer. Versus another company, if you had a problem, a defect somewhere, you probably could resolve it somehow or another. So I worked tons of hours, and we never ate well. Always went out to Chinese food and garbage and Emo's pizzas. It was pretty much our diet. And so there again, here comes the gray hair. Now, when I talk about stress, when Carolyn and I decided to quit, we traveled the country in a pop-up camper. And I was just wound up tight. I could actually start to feel it unbinding. But after a year, I was still wound up. Once I got out of there, I was still had that anxiety in my head that I was going to get that phone call in the middle of the night. It was just very stressful. And I don't think I would have lived much longer. I'm 51 now. I would suspect I would be dead by now. When we traveled the country, we decided to give that up. I mean, the stress was still pretty high because you were always having to move. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was not the stress that we wanted. We were trying to get away from stress. So we bought this off-grid property. And I tell you, when we first got here, there was a lot of things to do. We had to build a tiny house. We had to get solar panels hooked up. We had to get the well running. We had to get enough firewood that we at least could make it through the first year. And we were living in the camper at first. So we had this outdoor heat exchanger that I made that used firewood, and it used 8 cords of wood by January, because by January we moved into the tiny house. It just used a ton of wood. Now imagine if we didn't have that firewood. So we're trying to do all this in this first year. Oh, it was a lot of work, just a ton of work. Then the next year we decided to get chickens. And that was a lot of work too. We decided to get meat birds, and we had birds die, and it was just like, okay, we're just constantly fighting with these birds, trying to get it all to work out. And the meat birds, they were pretty fragile. They could die on a dime. Well, of course, we got up to like 100-degree weather, freak heat wave. So I'm out there with these meat birds, giving them baths every day so they could stay cool. I don't even think they were allowed to get above 90 degrees. And so these guys were just suffering seriously bad. So I was constantly out here taking care of them. Well, since then, we've gotten Brahmas and we've got Americanas, and we've had a lot of success, and the workload has dramatically dropped. So the other day, I get an email telling me how crazy I am. Now, I don't understand why people watch this channel if they don't agree with the philosophy. The philosophy here is to relax. And I hope that I have proven that there's not a lot to do anymore. I go out once a day, I grab an armful of firewood. Of course, I have to split it smaller than what it's already split. When we split it and stacked it, I mean, we hadn't used the wood stove, but we had an idea that, you know, they should be, you know, this big or whatever. Well, now that we're actually in there, we realized that was just way too much firewood. It would just roast us out of there. So we split it down nearly stick size now. I'm just not even as big around as my arm. They're just tiny. So I have to go over there with the hatchet and the maul, little hammer. I think it's a 5-pound hammer. And I split them. So I bring up a load or two of firewood every day. I split it, I bring it in the house, and I let it dry for about a week in the house. That way all the rainwater and everything gets off of it. At night, I put the chickens away. Now, the chickens go to bed by themselves. This is not a big process. Feed them some food, give them some water, and then Carolyn, she makes some sort of mesh every day. She does something. Now, Carolyn does try to stay pretty busy. She just likes to be busy. I've tried to get her to slow down. That's just her piece. But my piece is to be able to sit right here and do nothing all day. That's just the way I want it to be. So by taking care of the chickens, they feed me. The electric provides me with electric so I can make YouTube videos. I have a well for water. In the wintertime, I have to split a little bit of firewood, bring it in, let it dry, and 3 times a day I start the wood stove. So I get an email telling me how crazy this is, that I have to work too hard, and that it would be a lot easier to just go get a job, work your 8 hours, come home, and watch the football game. He did not understand why I would do all this work. This isn't work. By providing for myself and taking care of myself, I don't have an employer always chewing me out, always threatening to fire me, always telling me that I've messed something up, or a customer telling me we've got to reject, and now I got 50 disabled employees sitting around getting paid not doing anything. How is that easier than sitting here on this log making a YouTube video? So if you'll click this up next box, take you to a video where I was talking about being prepared. It's not really necessary when you live in your dreams. Thanks for watching.